All right, I will call the roll. Chair Tom Farrell.
Here.
Brooke Brown.
Here.
Wallace Grainer.
Here.
Ronald Hasso.
Here.
David Smith. David Raymond.
Here.
Ryan Clinton.
Here.
And Jeff Green.
Present.
And for the number calling in, I can't tell if you're a member of the strike force or not. So if so, let us know.
Very good. We'll get going. The first item I have is a citizens wishing to address the task force for items not on the agenda. So if anybody would that's calling in or that's on the call that would like to address on items not on the agenda. And I don't see a hand up, but as always, I'm not very good at that. So if anybody sees one, just please bring it to, just bring it up and we'll make sure we do that.
I don't see one, Tom. I did want to mention for the person calling in, *9 will raise your hand if you are interested in speaking.
Great. Okay. Item number 2 is discussion and possible action on the minutes from the June 28th meeting. And I have had a chance to read that. And of course, the big thing on that is our the items that we approved. So if there is a motion on that, we'll take a motion in a second and then discuss it if that's okay.
Move to approve.
We have a motion and we have a second. So we'll go ahead and discuss it. Does anybody have any changes or additions that they would like to make on the minutes? Or are they good as we've got them? Excellent. I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to take that. And again, we'll call the vote. And if you are in favor, just keep your hand down. If you're opposed, please raise your hand. And again, if somebody finds something later on, we can go back and amend these. So I don't see any raised hands, so the motion carries. Okay. Item number 3 is our working session with the BK Road Subcommittee, including discussion on front, rear, and side setbacks, green belts, impervious cover, height restrictions, and other concerns on individual commercial properties. And I think we left this, that we tabled our discussion on impervious cover last time. And so let's just kick it off with a discussion on the impervious cover. And let's see, David, I think you've got a comment.
Yeah, I'm happy to start unless someone else wants to start. And Tom, like you, I've gone back and compared notes with several different, or actually 2 different engineers that I know and work with well, who do a lot of water quality work, as well as a environmental consultant that I do a lot of work, water quality work with as well. And just to kind of get a feel for, you know, what would be reasonable, what would be appropriate, what would encourage redevelopment while still being protective of water quality and things like that. And Brooke, I did see your email and started to write a kind of some thoughts on that, but didn't. I'm happy to discuss them. But you know, kind of the bottom line is kind of for the watershed where we are in, which is the, you know, is defined on most City of Austin maps as the, and Tom, I know this is the wrong name, but the Eanes Creek watershed, which includes most of the corridor along Bee Caves Road to about where the really the particular watershed to about where Walgreens is, and only includes actually half of Rolling Wood, the southern half of Rolling Wood, and then goes actually and includes Mopac from Bee Caves Road to about kind of the Town Lake area. And that drains from a surface standpoint into the creek that goes, well, Indians Creek, which goes to by the rowing center. But so we're taking into that system Westwood Shopping Center. We're taking all their water. We're taking all of West Bank water. We're taking Bee Caves Road water. So, I mean, there's a lot of kind of suburban development and a lot of things going on. So, I think from a water quality standpoint, we certainly shouldn't be adding to it. But I think with all except for 2 properties, we're talking about redevelopment scenario along Bee Caves corridor. After comparing us with the people who I work on all of this stuff professionally with, I think, it's kind of the modern consensus that basically in our watershed, kind of modern commercial building design is going to lend itself to about 65% impervious cover. So I don't think impervious cover should be unlimited, but from a 65% impervious cover standpoint, that would be net impervious cover. So you wouldn't include things like engineered water quality features in that. But at 65%, you are basically, and particularly since we are in the recharge zone for the TCQ Edwards rules, they are going to have water quality features. At that level, basically under most redevelopment scenarios, in and along Bee Caves Road, we would actually be getting lowering impervious cover in most cases, and also with modern water quality features actually improving the water quality in terms of coming off of it. And I asked, by the way, I've asked Carrie to kind of pull the impervious cover on some representative properties just kind of by comparison. And those are Endeavor, the Mira Vista, let's see, Wally, your development there, the Palisades, Chinatown Center, and then the Center One, which is at the corner of Old Walsh Charlton and Bee Caves Road. And just to kind of like have comparison, because Wally, I mean, I don't know if you know off the top of your head or not, but you're at about, I think, probably 75% impervious cover, more or less.
Understand that's about right.
Yeah. And so, and then my understanding is Chinatown Center's about 75%. Endeavor, which per the PUD that I looked at, we're giving them 4 stories, but they're at 55%. That was a raw land development as opposed to a redevelopment scenario. So that's long, and I'm happy to go into, how the aquifer functions at that point in time, where any recharge that does occur goes, the difference between, really the difference between, what is recharge and what's the difference between infiltration and recharge in the aquifer, and what's kind of going on from a water quality standpoint perspective there from a geological and a scientific perspective. But, I really feel good kind of after the conversations I've had and understanding a lot about what's going on geologically and hydrologically with that system, that if we put put basically a a 65% impervious cover limit. Pretty much any modern developer is going to do a kind of development we're going to want to see is going to be able to meet that or exceed that. It's going to, under redevelopment scenarios, and most of these properties that are going to be, 75% plus, going to be something that's going to be both more attractive, plus with TCEQ standards and having to meet 80% removal efficiency of total suspended solids on any development is going to vastly improve the water quality. And by virtue of that, avoid any drainage issues there.
Thank you, David. I know that's your bailiwick, dealing with that stuff. Right now.
Can I add a point to David? I don't know if you're aware or not, but the east end of the property that the Palisades is on has almost a 3/4 acre retention pond in existence now.
Yeah. Is that on your property or next to your property?
On my property.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, but yeah, that makes sense.
Well, it just the comments have been made that this building was built without a building permit. And I don't want to get into some argument about it, but we have a specially designed septic system that does not drain into the aquifer. We have a retention pond, all of which was required by some official body, and I'm assuming it was the city of Rollingwood together with the other governing bodies.
Thank you, Wally. Let me ask you, David. One of the things that that I've been interested in, especially on those properties, just after meeting with the neighbors that are behind you, Wally, and behind some of the other properties as you go west on BK's Road. And this would pertain to Chinatown and many of the properties on BK's Road, maybe all of them. But a lot of our property owners are going to be at a higher elevation and looking down at these buildings. And one of the things they've all asked for is some type of vegetative burial. Now, the truth of the matter is you could put as much green belt behind your building as you want, and unless they're extraordinarily tall trees, that's not going to make a difference from that. So I was trying to look at ways to incentivize someone that was thinking about redevelopment that would give them an incentive to put something up there. And two things that I was thinking of is, number one is a green roof program. And I was concerned about whether I was asking for cost differential that would be make such a big difference that we would discourage somebody from doing that. So I'm thinking, David, how can we offer an incentive to someone to do either a vegetative burial? Now, that vegetative burial doesn't necessarily have to be, Wally, on, and I'm just using you as an example because you're here, on your property. It could be you go, somebody redevelops the property and they go, all right, I'm going to put a vegetative burial so you have a visual break between the neighbors and the commercial property. And if it doesn't work on your property, we could say we give credits or we give some incentive to say, put a vegetative burial on the neighbor's property. That would be satisfactory to them. They obviously have to approve it and everything. At least make a plan for that. And there's a lot of drawbacks to that, obviously, because we may never get approval for one thing, but we may, it may be a way that to solve two of those problems on that. Now, the 65% is, and David, let me make sure that I cover a few things before I go into this. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a bit. But David, if I am a developer developing on BK's Road, I have two requirements that I have to do anyway. I have to make sure that I don't have more water going on to my neighbor's property or going into the creek downstream that would cause a problem downstream, period. Our engineers have to certify that they're not doing
engineers
that.
have certified that. Plus, you can't legally cause the floodplain to be bigger too.
Okay.
You can't increase the floodplain.
Okay. And the second question I had on that is the water quality cannot deteriorate. That's based on as if it wasn't developed. Is that correct? That's my understanding.
It's basically you have to attenuate 80% of all total suspended solids coming off of the development on the property. So you have to attenuate 80%. Mostly the way that's done for commercial development is by some sort of engineered filtration pond. I mean, there's a few other mechanisms for doing it, but on smaller developments like this, you're going to see pretty much universally a filtration pond that's basically going to take it, let the total suspended solids filter out, and then slowly release the water. There are some other ways, and I think, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think, like, for instance, the Chevron there has, for their car wash at least, some sort of capture re-irrigation. That's used sometimes also because it has an even higher removal efficiency of TSS. So there's different ways to kind of get to it. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, you have to capture 80% of everything that's attributable to the development on there versus the raw natural state. And that also takes into account, and from a TCEQ perspective, well, I won't get into that, but I mean, that's the general rule of thumb. And I'm not going to get into what happens on some of the trickier slopes and whatnot, where you have to capture more than that because, even though, like, on slopes over about 10%, TCEQ won't give you any credit from a pure water quality standpoint for slopes that are too steep, because even though it is impervious covered, you're not getting impervious cover benefit from it, from an attenuation of TSS standpoint, because the water's moving across it too fast to get any sort of soil infiltration or water quality benefit from vegetation. But that's kind of getting into the weeds from a kind of engineering standpoint.
Now, we have to, as a city, we have to adhere to the WPAP rules, the water quality, I can't remember what it stands for, but I think it's WPAP, isn't it?
It's WP. It's Watershed Protection and Abatement Program. Yeah.
Okay. We're required as a city to, and we have to pass an ordinance in our city that made everybody, residential and commercial, adhere to WPAP rules.
Right.
So we have to, that anybody that's developing has to adhere to that.
Yeah.
The other issue we have out there is we're members of we're within the Barton Creek Edwards Aquifer Conservation Zone.
Well, no, we're in the Barton Edwards underground water conservation district.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a underground water conservation district. We're not, and that's a common perception. We're not in the Barton Creek in terms of the aquifer. Yeah. We're not in the Barton Creek sector of the aquifer. We're in the Edwards Aquifer, but not in the Barton Springs sector. And so basically, any infiltration that occurs because of the way groundwater moves in our part of the world, it's moving from the west, actually from the kind of southwest towards the northeast. And so any infiltration that occurs at our part in the aquifer over Rollingwood generally is discharged at either Cold Springs, which is kind of actually on the hillside up above Lake Austin off of Stratford Drive, or in a little bit comes out in Deep Eddy as well. So there's a divide geologically. So none of the infiltration that does occur actually goes towards the springs because we're so far down in the system.
And for those of us who have been here a long time, Rollingwood actually at one time, and I can't remember if we did it or the state did it or somebody did it, we dropped dye underneath the city of Rollingwood into the aquifer. And that's why we know where it came out at. Did not come out in Barton Springs. Came out at Cold Springs. I thought Cold Springs was in the middle of Lake Austin, but you may be right. I don't really know where it is. I know that
it's not, they don't really publicize where it is exactly. I know where it is because of kind of, you know, some working with some permitted folks, but yeah, it's actually kind of in a little saddle up on the the hillside just below where some of the houses are on Stratford.
Okay.
But all that water flows directly into Ladyburg Lake.
So if we had, is there any thoughts about how we incentivize either and I'm not saying, I wouldn't be in favor right now of making it a mandatory thing because I think there's too many variables there. David?
Yeah, I have a thought on that, kind of on where I think you're going and I want to be pretty clear on one thing. You know, based on conversations I've had with, you know, particularly with engineers, you know, developers are used to developing to 65% impervious coverage or less, particularly and this is more of a suburban application than an urban application, even though it's redevelopment of properties that may be bigger than that. They're used to designing to that aesthetically and otherwise. And so I think 65% impervious cover should be a max impervious cover. And I don't think we should, even with incentives, allow more than that because they're used to designing to it. I think aesthetically it's going to be prettier. It's going to, you know, from a landscaping standpoint, everything else look better. And they're frankly used to doing it. And so, and also we're going to have the you know, the need for engineered water quality features too. So I would work off of 65% from kind of my professional standpoint as a max and work off of that for incentives. I think green roofs and that whole movement are great as long as you can kind of agree to some, you know, as an incentive base, as long as you can agree to kind of some standards of it, and make sure we're talking about green roofs from a vegetative standpoint and green roofs not from necessarily a climate change standpoint, because you get into, I mean, sometimes they're aligned, but sometimes they kind of depart. But also, you know, along with green roofs, you know, take a look at encouraging, you know, rainwater harvesting, which are, you know, a way of, it's not 100% offset against impervious cover, but you're negating a lot of the impervious cover effects because you're basically capturing and reusing or capturing and doing something else with it. So it's not a one for one, and TCEQ has some standards on, you know, how much credit to give for things like that. But I mean, I think we should be encouraging those sorts of things. I love the idea of, you know, encouraging the use of vegetative buffers in conjunction and coordination, and incentivizing that in conjunction and coordination with neighboring landowners. I think it's good just development practice, but I think it's good to something good to encourage developers to do. They can do it. They have the ability to do it so long as we make sure that they're using, you know, either native or adaptive, you know, plant species. And, you know, City of Austin and a lot of others have done a lot of work on that too.
Well, we have currently, our baseline is 50% impervious cover, and with certain engineering features, you can go up to 75% impervious cover. I think, Carrie, I mean, we sent, Ashley, we sent that out to everybody, didn't we? That ordinance.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we did. That's right.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I think what we were.
I thought those additions that you could do were not very up to date, frankly. I think the rainwater capture and green roofs and vegetative barriers are much more effective and would provide a better visual effect for our neighbors than what we would do. I've got several lawyers on here. So if we tried to incentivize where a commercial developer, where they didn't have the, from an elevation standpoint, they could not have a vegetative visual barrier between the residents and the commercial property. Am I opening a can of worms by saying a approach could be that you have a vegetative visual barrier that would be on our residential property owner's property, but it would be put there by somebody doing redevelopment? Obviously, they'd have to agree to it, and they would, you know, do that. Am I opening too big of a can of worms with that? Anybody?
I'm slightly nervous about that because, you know, I put myself in the place of a property owner who, if I were next to a property that was being redeveloped and, you know, the developer said, hey, I'd be willing to pay for a vegetative buffer of some sort, you know, I would want to make sure that, okay, that's great if you pay for it, but, you know, if you pay for it, but I want to be able to design it. I want to be able to, you know, control it. I want to make sure this doesn't give you any property rights on my property, you know, et cetera. So, you know, and also I'd want the option if I didn't want to do it, I could say no, you know, and I don't know. I mean, I'd like to get some other people's perspective on it. I mean, I think it would be, you know, nice, but it's you know, I mean, there's some interesting property rights issues that it'd be nice on a voluntary basis. But, you know, in terms of incentivizing that, some people may want it, some people may not want it, you know, et cetera. So I'd like to hear some other perspectives on that. You know, I'm all for it on you know, property that the developer controls, or even potentially property that the city controls. But I get a little bit more nervous about incentivizing it on neighboring landowners because of some of the property rights considerations. That's just
the only reason I thought about that is looking specifically at those properties from the creek over to Rollingwood Drive. We're going to see a lot of excavation if they're redeveloped, the potential excavation that might go on in there. And if they do that, then it has to be something pretty tall to make a difference on that. Brooke, you were at that meeting with the neighbors on Westgate and on Timberline. And that was, I heard that to be one of the biggest issues that they had, that there wasn't a vegetative barrier there, a visual vegetative barrier.
Right. And I don't know if this is correct or not, but several of them said that that building, which preceded Wally's ownership of it, was not built in compliance with the current ordinances. So it would seem to me, although I think David brings up some issues we need to consider, but it would seem to me that if we permit redevelopment of a non-conforming building on the current pad, then you could lawfully provide either the option to come into compliance with the current code or redevelop with accommodations made so that adjoining property owners agree to the redevelopment on the existing pad. I would think there's a way to do that within legal bounds. So that's a situation, you know, where we would have a new code that would allow expanded development over by Chinatown in that area. I think whatever you would have to come up with for several reasons would have to apply uniformly. It would have to be yes. Now you could do, I think, and what I've seen, you know, in reading some of these other ordinances that do encouragements, one way to do that would be to say that there's no variance from the standard. Let's say that's 50% impervious cover or 65%, whatever it is. No variance can be granted except, and then you would have the encouragement in the exception portion of it. And, you know, you could do it for where a new code applies, like the Chinatown situation. I don't think you'd want to leave that in the hands of the property owner to control for reasons David's mentioned, but you could have the exception such that the council may grant up to X% additional building area if the landscape design meets these criteria. And in the criteria say, you know, maximizes the visual buffer between the property, the residential property and the commercial property, something like that. I think you could do something like that.
It seems to me that what my goal was, was frankly to look at this from a standpoint of when I got down to impervious cover to where I was going, it's a trade-off between height and impervious cover. And that if we can get more impervious cover without getting greater height, it would be less intrusive to the people that lived behind it on Timberline and Westgate Circle. For instance, instead of building a 10,000 square foot building that's 2 stories, you have a 10,000 square foot building that's 1 story, but it's taking up more impervious cover, provided that all the engineering is done and incentives are done to where they're retaining that water, where the net effect is the same. I don't know if that made sense. Didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and along those lines, and Brooke, I want to make sure kind of everyone understands. When I say 65% impervious cover, and after really digging into it and talking with folks, comparing notes with folks, I mean, for me, 65% impervious cover is kind of a blanket limit, frankly, and I'm not even talking about because developers are used to it. Engineers are, under modern engineering, as we sit here in 2021, they're used to engineering to that and engineering in that. And yeah, I mean, even though we have some properties that are, 70, 75% impervious cover on a redevelopment scenario, I wouldn't, from an impervious cover standpoint, for redevelopment scenario, I wouldn't consider, and I'm not proposing to let them, build to that same impervious cover, because I think under the redevelopment scenario, they can, because they're used to doing it engineering to 65. So for me, 65 is, kind of a blanket, and it's really two things. One is 65% impervious cover combined with what we've done with some of the reducing some of the burdens from the setbacks. I think pretty much on every piece of property I've looked at, I think that's, achievable, even with, the 2-story 30-foot height limitation.
Okay. Well, the one
this is Ryan.
Ryan.
Yeah, I just wanted to pipe in. I don't think I'm not comfortable with having something that says you can cut a deal with your neighbor to put green space on their yard. I think the biggest problem with that is that the next neighbor may not want it there. They might want to build there. And what do we do now as a city? Now we have no green space between them. The other thing is one neighbor might agree to it, and the neighbor next door might not. And because they're not in agreement, the whole thing doesn't work anymore. It doesn't provide a cover because they don't line up well. So I'm not sure that works. It seems to me that if there are spaces, and I'm thinking of, Wally's talked about his space, there's no green space in between, but perhaps, and this is along the lines of what Brooke talked about, if there is some space between the building and the adjacent abutting residential property, we could require the development of green space between them as part of the allowance to rebuild under the same footprint. I don't know if that gets us to where we need to be, because I'm not familiar with how much space is in between those properties.
It's only 30 feet, and you have a building, and then you have a cliff. So, I mean, I guess plants can grow there, but it'd be tough because they don't. There, Wally, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Grant Realty.
The other thing is, so I would like to provide some incentives to have some visual deal, and the green roofs program was intriguing to me, and I just started looking at that. But many of the developers I talked to said, look, we gain energy efficiency, and it's not depending on what it is. I mean, some of these are intensive, and some of them are not so intensive about how they do that. Mm-hmm. So, and I was trying to reach my friend Ann Coleman, who has developed, who's a landscape architect, and she was unfortunately out of town. So,
in one of the papers that main paper that I attached to my email about green roofs, it indicated several different studies showing that because of the insulating effect of the green roof, the building owner actually offsets the cost of the green roof with savings in air conditioning efficiency. So if they're done right, they provide benefits to the building owner. One of the concerns that I saw with the study that the city of Austin had done on green roofs was that if you put it in and it's not designed well from a plant standpoint or from how the substrata actually supports the plant life, whether it's how deep it is and what the material is, then you're just constantly replanting it if it's not designed correctly for the plants.
The one Brooke, the one I went to look at actually had pots and ranged in a kind of a walkway type of approach. And it was a very nice visual deal, I thought, that came about. And I want to bring up, I want to make sure I give credit to this. Actually, the Green Roof program, in which I'm embarrassed I didn't think of it because I'd actually went and toured one and I didn't think about it again. But Sarah Hudson is the one that brought that up to my attention.
Right.
And I want to make sure I point that out. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just as you gave me permission to talk, the phone rang and I had to hang it up quickly. What I was going to interject is, in the Palisades situation, which I think is probably the one unusual situation along the north side of Bee Cave, we have, I didn't build this, I didn't plan it, I inherited it.
I know.
From the area at the back of the property, I have about a 8 to 10 foot flat surface that I have a sloped retaining wall that goes down to the foot of the pad area that they created. And that distance from the back property line to the bottom of the retaining wall, plus about the 5 or 8 feet I have air conditioners sitting down low, they're sitting down at the bottom of this, that's your 30-foot setback. That's the current city setback when the building was built. There's no way in that area because I've got a stacked block wall. I can't put trees at the top or any other plantings that grows root come down because they'll push the rocks out of the wall. It just, as I say, I didn't design it. I may have put a vertical wall rather than what they did, but nonetheless, that's what it is. So you got a 30-foot area at the back of this property that my back windows look at a stock rack wall, and that's what they get to look at.
So
that's what I got.
My intent is on this is to encourage someone, if they redevelop. We're not telling you have to redevelop, Wally.
No, I understand.
But to do this at a height that is less, but has less of a visual impact on our neighbors, but also gives an incentive for someone to do it to where they have the same square footage as if they went up. Does that make sense to you? You've done this enough in your life. Yep. You're concerned about square footage. And so the 65% would be a reduction of 10% roughly on the Palisades property on that.
Well, realistically on the Palisades, right now I have approximately, if the concrete in the ground that the buildings sit on, the pad sites have about 22,000 square foot of impervious cover holding the buildings vertically. So realistically, and with that, the rest is parking area, and the parking area is roughly at a 4 parking per every 1,000 square foot of rent space. Now, when I go stories, I'm going like building A is 10,000 on the ground and 10,000 above. Then the next 3 buildings go down to 4,000 and 4,500 and around 5,000 square feet. So if you go down to a 1-story retail establishment, you're going to be able to, you can't put the retail up here on the pads that were built because you're above the grade of your parking lot, and nobody really wants to do that. Yeah. So you're going to put your buildings down, and your front setback from the street sounds good. You put the buildings up down there, and then I have enough land to park 175 cars on the remaining usable parking lot area. You take that out, take 20,000 square feet out of it for your retail stores, you're in kind of a tight situation. That's only 4-to-1 parking. That's 80 cars. And that's about what you're going to have. And that's 4-to-1. And for retail parking, that's insufficient. I don't know about the 65% impervious cover he's talking about. Candidly, I've never really dealt that much with it because I've dealt in other areas. I've always used a number that has to do with the basic size and the kind of tenancy I was going to have. And I put in a parking lot that was adequate so we didn't have people saying, my customers can't get to my shop.
Okay. Well, let me back up just a little bit. David, we're talking about on the water quality and the detention, that would not count as impervious cover.
No.
So, and it's not anyway, because it's.
Well, right. I mean, you know, purely speaking, it's, you know, water quality, you know, retention, filtration ponds, not impervious cover per se anyways. And TCQ doesn't count it as impervious cover in any of their calculations.
Okay. So, I get bound to my question. How do we incentivize? What do we offer as an incentive for redevelopment that gives greater visual security to our neighbors on Timberline and Westgate?
Tom, if you look at the Westlake Hills ordinance, they incentivize by providing additional impervious cover percentages. I think their base is 45% impervious cover, with additional percentages up to, I believe their maximum is 47%.
Yeah.
For different kinds of, they've got a list of things, including landscaping that goes in above beyond the standard.
Yeah.
In essence.
And I will tell you, I looked at that and I thought, my Lord, that would be, that's a lot of little add-ons that come in, and it's hard. It would be very difficult for our residents to, you know, to kind of follow all the add-ons. I think I would, my preference is to have maybe something less than the to allow greater along that line, Brooke. I agree, but just it's got to be more than a 1% to me for somebody to do that. I want to make it really telling to where we come in and say, look, if you do a green roof, if you do extra landscaping that's a visual barrier on that, then you can have extra impervious cover. Does that make sense? David, we're from your conversations with developers, 65% is like a cap anyway that we'll be looking at.
Right, because I mean, and it's a cap for a couple of reasons. One, it's what, you know, under modern design standards in this sort of council application, you know, I mean, that's kind of their, you know, kind of max build out scenario given modern water quality functions plus modern landscaping requirements. And, you know, in terms of what Brooke just pointed out, there are a couple things on that City of Westlake Hills menu that I think are worth, taking a look at in terms of incentives. One's, the increased landscaping or setbacks, which is incentive item B, where you basically, allow increased landscaping or increased setbacks over and above what they typically require. And you could kind of tweak that a little bit and get to what you're talking about, particularly in a scenario where you're going from maybe 75% impervious cover to 65% impervious cover, give basically some sort of credit for native revegetation, that sort of thing. I think your idea of green roofs, and I would combine green roofs with rainwater harvesting, off of rooftops. I mean, it's, because you're basically, if you can, encourage, basically offset the water that's going to be coming off of hardscape structures, by rainwater harvesting, you're basically offsetting impervious cover in terms of water runoff. Plus, from a water efficiency, water reuse standpoint, you're encouraging it for reuse of landscaping, et cetera. It's kind of a win-win-win.
And you're keeping it out of the drainage system too.
Right. No, exactly. And that's what I say. It's a win-win-win from, water quality, water savings, plus runoff and drainage.
let me, and I want to really make sure that I'm 100% on this. So whatever anybody does, they're not going to be able to, they're going to have to retain that water. And I really want to make sure we focus on this, that they're not going to cause greater flooding on Edgegrove Drive because of rebuilding at a 65 rather than a 50, even though they're actually going down from 75 to 65 on case.
If I can interject here,
Sure.
I guess the 75% current impervious cover in commercial areas was before Rollingwood adopted the 50% limit. How did that happen?
I'm guessing that they were all grandfathered. I don't know the timing on that.
Yeah.
That was all done before. It was a very, when those buildings were built Wally, yours was in the 80s.
Yeah, it started probably around 1981, 82, when they were doing the planning and doing whatever they had to do to talk to the city. And then they started construction about 83.
Yeah,
And
so David, could I ask, how did you compute the 75%? Is that just what the developers told you?
That's what I've gotten from city staff.
Okay.
Yeah. So
is that how many?
That's what I've got to see.
Be shared with the committee so we could see what the, is this on every property? Some properties?
No.
So basically, Brooke, what I've done is I've looked at a handful of properties and I've asked Carrie to verify, for a handful of kind of what I consider to be representative properties, to take a look at, just so we have, you're right. I mean, just so we have kind of some information out there to compare.
Well, I think it's important for the reason Tom raises. We know that all of the larger properties, even those on the south side, drain into Dry Creek.
Yeah.
So if sort of the bottom line is, no additional flows into Dry Creek from Rollingwood properties, then we need to know what's going in there now. More than just I've looked at a handful.
Well, I think, remember, the Rollingwood properties are a relatively small portion that would affect Edgegrove.
Yeah, we're taking a bunch of water from other properties up in the drainage basin.
I understand that, but if that's sort of our bottom line, then if it's 75% good, that gives us a bound to know we're not doing anything more than that. But do we really know what that percentage is?
They're all going to be different.
I know.
And some of them, I can tell you that Rollingwood Town Center is 55% impervious cover.
I saw that. I saw the 50% the PUD agreement.
Right.
55. Yeah,
55.
Well, what I got offline was maybe there's increases that are permitted, but I had pulled that from the city ordinance.
This is the PUD agreement.
Yes, the PUD agreement as contained in the city ordinance.
And they did a couple of things to get that little extra deal. One, they moved it closer to BK's Road. They gave us 2 acres of land, and they're at the lower end of our drainage area that really didn't have any real impact on any other properties.
Okay.
So, and then I think
it's 55% in the PUD agreement.
Yeah, and then Mara Vista also has a higher than that, and they did that for because they gave we let them count their right of way. Remember, there is an ordinance in Rollingwood that if you dedicate roadway to TxDOT for improvement on the highway, you get to count that as part of your impervious cover.
Right.
As it goes in.
Let me ask this. When I looked at Travis County, Westlake, and Oak Hill and Austin, they're all at an impervious cover percentage of 50% or lower. You know, Westlake has some incentives. Travis County was 45%.
Well, but
where are builders? Where is the 65% limit coming from?
Well, if you it depends on where in the city of Austin you're developing.
Right.
Like, for instance, if I was developing downtown Austin, I get to go 100%.
Right, but in the area,
if you go out northeast, you get to go at a much higher. In fact, I think it's even higher than 65%. It really, that was because of the SOS ordinance on the limitation of impervious cover on Barton Springs. That's one part of that. Bro.
Okay, what I'm asking is, where does, if a developer on the west side of town, so to speak, is subject to these other ordinances, they can't build to 65%, it seems to me, but what am I missing?
Well, again, it depends on where they're building, because the city of Austin offers, remember, some places they'll offer where you can buy into a regional detention facility, and then you can build, you know, whatever you do. So, but I think what David's saying is, and David, you got your hand up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
If you don't have that, they're going to build to 65% generally anyway, because they think that you have to have landscaping on your property, and you have to have they just don't build generally to the whole thing. Is that correct, David?
Yeah, but plus water quality and everything, and you know, it's I mean, some of the things I think, Brooke, you looked at are maybe a little bit kind of misleading, because they're not necessarily applicable. And like Travis County Conservation Development Standards are typically for raw land development over a certain acreage too. So it's a little bit apples and oranges. But I mean, I'm just, you know, I'm talking about kind of generally applicable, development standards, particularly in redevelopment scenarios.
Well, here's my question. We know we're in a recharge zone. Within the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone, what's the typical commercial?
So let me ask you, what are we trying to be protective of? What outcome are we trying to achieve?
On the impervious cover limitation?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the question, because I mean, really where we are in the aquifer, any recharge that occurs isn't going to Barton Springs. Any recharge that occurs is really at the tail end of the groundwater movement, and going to be, any little recharge that occurs is going to be going into Town Lake. Any overland flow is going into Town Lake, and the TCEQ Edwards rules require us to basically to achieve, require any development to achieve what's called a non-degradation standard. That is a standard at which you won't have degradation of the water quality in the watershed. And so basically, the point being, at 65% impervious cover, max. And, you know, I mean, if we, you know, if we want to have incentives for a developer to be able to get to that, we're not going to be adversely impacting anything from an environmental perspective. And so, and we're going to be allowing and encouraging redevelopment, but at the same time, not impacting, you know, any sort of sensitive environmental or ecological issue, and not going to be impacting drainage.
Well, I'm just trying to evaluate that compared to what other jurisdictions in this same area where Rollingwood lies, they've evaluated the same questions.
But
and
they're at a different place in the system, Brooke, and these are general. And also some of what you've put out there isn't accurate or applicable. I mean, you quote the city of Austin. You quote the city of Austin, Barton Springs, or the Barton Creek requirements were not in the Barton Creek watershed. You quote the city of, or the Travis County Conservation Subdivision, which are basically low impervious cover situations on raw land development out in the county area that aren't applicable here. We're in a different spot in terms of both the aquifer, from an aquifer perspective. So all of Oak Hill is in the Barton Springs, both recharge zone area, plus also watershed. You know, that goes for large swaths of Westlake Hills, et cetera. We're in a different spot, and also we're already developed to a level that from an engineering standpoint, we're going to be able to, if we're at 65, you know, we're going to be able to actually create better environmental uplift from doing that.
Well, let me ask you, David, if we had some basis, as you say, 65% would be the max, but we provided, if we went down from that, and then what would be a number that you'd be comfortable with if we went down from that, but said you can go up to 65 if you do the revegetation, the green roof, or the rainwater harvesting, and then we had an engineer, their engineer, certify that the effect on the runoff would be equal to whatever number we're going to pick on that. Does that make sense? I want to incentivize these things.
Yeah, and kind of what I'm looking at is kind of the most recent developments, the Endeavor Tract, which basically is 55% impervious cover, but we gave them credit for the 2 acres that they donated to the city. So the effective impervious cover is actually higher because we gave them credit for what they donated. You know, I mean, in my mind, and I always try to keep these things, you know, try to keep them fairly simple. But in my mind, you know, I wouldn't go, you know, below 55% impervious if we want to encourage redevelopment and you know, limit things to 2-story, you know, 30-foot, and encourage redevelopment. I wouldn't go below 55%. And up to a max of 65 with incentives.
So we do 55 with the possible 10% addition for.
And look, I mean, that's just kind of my, you know, on the 55%, that's just kind of my gut taking a look at most of what's, you know, kind of been going on with you know, modern design standards, modern water quality features. I mean, if we want to really encourage redevelopment.
Which I do. And I want to, but I want to make sure, just like Wally was saying, it's tight for what his property if we put that.
And I you know, I realize it's tight, and I'm sympathetic to the fact that it's tight. But I mean, I you know, I think that without, you know, without a whole lot of effort. It's what people are, used to designing to.
Yeah. Well, Brooke, let me ask you, if we do it's 10%, 10% is a pretty good incentive to do that.
Well, here's where I'm starting from. One, I need to see the data. It's 75% today.
I don't think all of them are going to be 75%, but I think some of them will be.
Yeah.
We can do the calculations, the ones in Rollingwood.
Well, I would just like to get a comfort level about where we really are today, and then two, I need to look again because the maps I looked at showed Rollingwood within the Barton Creek recharge zone. If you could send me a map that shows it's not, I'm happy to be corrected.
Well, Brooke, I can tell you, we did the dye study.
Where was the dye placed?
Remember, we used to have wells in Rollingwood?
Yes.
And we dropped it in the wells. This was back when Mayor McClellan, I don't remember the year, but Mayor McClellan was the mayor of Austin at the time we did it. So whatever years that was. And we did that because at the time there was a contention that Rollingwood septic tanks were polluting Barton Springs. And so I believe it was not TCQ, it was either the Texas Water Commission or Trainwreck, TNRCC, that did that, whatever the timeline on that was, and determined that our flow underground here went north. And I thought it came up in the middle of the river and in Deep Eddy, that area, but it did not come up in Barton Springs. I do remember that.
Did TCEQ did it, you think, the study?
They've changed their name, and my guess is this dates back to where it was handled by the Texas Water Commission, Texas Water Commission, TWC. And I'm not sure, I can't tell you they did it or who did it, but I know it was done. It may have been LCRA. Somebody did it. I know that. I remember I was around when it was done.
Well, and I don't want to get in an argument. This ought to be,
yeah, we can find it. It dates back to the 70s.
Well, and currently, the studies that have been done more currently than that.
Yeah.
Is the Barton Creek recharge zone something that's been defined by
we can get that data because what's the agency that is it the Barton Creek Underground Aquifer District that we're in?
The Underground Water Conservation Districts, the Barton Edwards.
And they've done all the research on that. And
that's what the map I looked at.
But we don't drain to Barton Springs.
Well, I guess the way I would put it is, do the governing agencies see Rollingwood as in the Barton Springs recharge zone, if that's the proper terminology? I
think legally, when they drew the lines, it required a vote of to join that district, and most of those votes, like 90%, were in the city of Austin. And when they drew the line, part of Rollingwood and part of Westlake Hills was included in that. And I think we voted against it, but obviously we didn't have the votes to carry the day on that.
So Rollingwood declined to join the district.
No, we got voted in over our local vote.
We
didn't get an individual.
Yeah, that was a legislative decision.
Yeah. And so we are in the district.
Yes.
We just have a study that says we don't drain into it.
Yeah, we don't drain into Barton Springs. But, and we can get that, and they'll acknowledge that, because when there was a time when we had to, before TCEQ took that over, Barton Edwards Aquifer Conservation, that you had to go to them to get their approval on a building plan.
Right.
Back in the day.
And remember the Barton Springs Edward Aquifer Underground Water District is basically an underground water district that regulates groundwater withdrawals.
Yeah.
And so it regulates withdrawals out of the aquifer.
And we do have private wells in Rollingwood.
Correct.
That are regulated by that conservation district. But there's a different, in fact, Brooke, I'll tell you, since 1998, I've tried to get us out of that district. And they basically went, sure, well, you pay for the vote, the election, and it's all of Austin, basically. And I went, well, we're not going to do that. And then see if you can win the vote to get out. But that's, it was done by the Texas legislature. They drew the lines, and I'm not sure why that they did that, but, right. We got in it.
Where I am, and after I looked at what the surrounding jurisdictions do, I want to make sure I can go above 50%, but I want to make sure that we are doing it based on what we know to be good water management, water quality management, and aquifer management. And so, I would like to do this thoughtfully if we're going to do that, because if we adopt 65% impervious cover, it's going to be higher than what the surrounding, you do a commercial property for in the surrounding area. And do we want to do that? I want to make sure that if we do that, we do it responsibly, and we're not going to.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. My biggest concern, frankly, is.
Although I will say that the West Bank Center is, I guarantee it's West Bank Center. I guarantee is way over 65, and I know West
Center. I'm sorry, David.
Westwood.
No, I'm talking about West Bank, where West Bank Market, where the Randalls is.
Oh, yeah, probably is.
Well, we could probably all come up with anecdotal properties that are not within modern standards, but we're talking here about a new modern standard.
Yeah.
And, let's.
Well, but I was comparing properties in other jurisdictions that they're draining onto us that,
and everything we get from them, we add to, and we put it back on City of Austin. So I'm not sure that tells us anything about what standard we ought to have.
Well, I don't know that we're putting it back on City of Austin.
But we put it into Dry Creek. Dry Creek runs into City of Austin property.
Yeah.
And I've walked it all the way down to Town Lake, and it goes into Town Lake.
So let me ask you, Brooke. I appreciate what you're saying. We can figure out if we pick a spot and decide where we want to go on that. We can do the background, make sure that we're good on that. My big concern, frankly, on any of this is I want to make doubly sure that we don't add to any drainage problems specifically on Edge Grove, but we have property owners, both commercial and residential, that border the creek. And I want to make sure that we don't have any drainage problems down below that. So whatever we do, I would like to add in there that the engineers of the proposed redevelopment have to come back and tell us that they're not adding to that drainage on that drainage problems on that area. And they can do that through detention. They can do that through revegetation, rainwater harvesting, or green roof program. And that's
what I've heard when you say not adding to drainage problems. What I understand the TCEQ water quality standards to do is they don't control volume. They control the rate of flow. And that's so right. You mean both volume and rate of flow, or do you mean just rate of flow?
No, I want to make sure that we are not adding to problems in any way to our downstream commercial properties or residential properties or Edge Grove Drive. Eventually, we're going to have some type of fix on Edge Grove Drive. And when we do, I would like to make sure that it's permanent and we don't have to redo it after we build it. Okay. That's a major impact on our city. Now, that's a bottom line to me is all the rest of this is as long as engineers come back, and I hate to limit, frankly, I always like to provide commercial property developers an opportunity to be innovative as long as it meets the test of engineering standards that says an engineer is willing to say that, and the city engineer is willing to agree with it, that it is not going to cause any additional drainage problem. And that's impervious cover is designed for two reasons. One is for drainage issues. To me, this is why we do it. And the second one is that you have more green space. And since we've covered a lot of that with the setbacks that we have on green space, I'm okay with that. And so if we fix the drainage on this, I think that would be, I'm satisfied. And there may be some kid in a garage somewhere who's an engineering student and he's coming up with a better plan than what we can put. And I'd like to have that as an option. Michael Dell in his garage putting together computers, or he put together a model to be able to figure out better way to do the drainage. But I specifically want to include that revegetation effort, rainwater harvesting, and green roof program as part of an incentive program to do that. And if we went with 55% and a 10% incentive program, that's a big incentive for somebody to do that, I would think. David, you've talked to developers, but that seems to me to be a pretty good approach. And Wally, you can jump in. You've developed properties before.
Generally, an incentive will help when you're dealing with a bunch of regulations. It's just the amount of regulations that are going to be required for handling problems are going to affect retention ponds, detention ponds, landscaping, all of these. Every time you say that, you take a piece of the square footage away from the buildable areas where you get your return if you're building a commercial building. And anytime it takes a 10,000 square foot building to a 5,000 square foot building,
yeah,
you just killed any possible redevelopment.
Don't want to do that. And one of the things we're doing as an incentive on that that I agree with totally is we're not going to count the water quality or detention as impervious cover. So that's a big incentive. But I want to also add, I like the idea of it being like 55% with a 10% approach to doing this, where the engineers, right now, we actually, our current code allows up to 75%, provided it starts at 50, but it says you can go up to 75% if you put in certain features like greencrete and permeable concrete and all this. the problem, I really don't like any of that stuff. One, you know, the Green Creek is a ankle breaker walking across it. It has to be maintained. And even the permeable concrete after a couple years gets kind of iffy as it does that. So to my standpoint, what I would like to do, I could live with the 55 plus a 10%, and we add some criteria that says these are acceptable or other things that meet the standard to where you end up with the, say, 55% when you finish as impervious cover, as certified by the engineers. But I also would like to put a provision in there, and David, you've dealt with this. This is your bailiwick. And I want to make doubly sure, if I'm a developer and I'm redeveloping Wally, and I apologize, I'm using you as an example again.
That's fine.
If I'm redeveloping Wally's project, I am not allowed to add more flow to that creek that causes a problem for either commercial or residential properties downstream. And that's very important to me to know that, or Edge Grove.
Yeah, as a matter of law, that is correct.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, you have to, I mean, you can only discharge the same amount or less, but, you know, particularly, I mean, I look at it, you know, Wally's case is kind of more pronounced than, say, like the Chinatown Center because of slopes.
Yeah.
So because of the slopes on Wally, water's going to be coming, you know, even if Wally's tract was in native undeveloped state, a lot of water is going to be coming off of that because of the slopes at a very high rate of speed, and you're going to get very little uplift out of it. So basically, in terms of drainage, you take the property as it is now, and you cannot release more water off that site legally than is currently coming off of it. But functionally also, from a TCEQ water quality perspective, you have to capture and basically capture and treat, if you will, through filtration, pond most likely, or detention re-irrigation, which is basically also going to, in order to do that from an engineering standpoint, it's going to require you to basically stop that water, retain it for a certain amount of time, and then slow release it.
Now, so I'm really okay with that. Ryan, you're on. You overlooked and this is not just Wally. I won't pick on Wally on this one, but on Chinatown, we have our residents overlooking Chinatown. So if they redevelop that, and you have green roofs and a vegetative revegetation of the area, and I'm not sure how to get to the credit on revegetation of a visual area of the commercial. But I think you could do that if you, it would just have to be a different type of vegetation you'd put in that would do that. But any vegetation that would go in would act as permeable type of deal that they could get credit for on that. So I think that would be something. Now, let me, I could live with the 55 with the 10%, I think. The more I think about that. Brooke, I'm not trying to rush this through, because if we need any more data, I'll be glad to try to get it. But we can certainly get what as much data on what our existing impervious cover are on our businesses, and although the smaller ones I probably would not, we could get them all if we need to, but you tell me what you feel comfortable with, and I'll try to get you that data.
Okay, well, we know the current ordinance is 50%, and certain kinds of property are less than 100%. I don't know that can go all the way up to 65%. I could see how it could. Yeah. I just, to have a comfort level saying we're good if we go from what we have now to 65%.
Yeah.
With incentives. I'm just looking for data that gives me a level of where that is compared to our current impervious cover limits. I can read the ordinance, but I don't know what is really there today.
Well, let me kind of clarify one thing that I'm thinking. The 55% up to 65%, that delta would require an engineer to say, okay, we're going to do 10% more impervious cover, but it's being mitigated by rainwater harvesting, revegetation, or green roof program, or some other method that they can think of. So your net effect is going to be 55, period. That's what my thought is.
Okay.
And so I'm not giving them, on paper it'll be 65, but the net effect would be the 55%.
Yeah,
they can't add to any of my drainage problems downstream.
Yeah, because the thing that's a little bit worrisome to me about the way it's currently written is, it says it shall not exceed 50, impervious cover shall not exceed 50%. But then you get into the exceptions where, I think Brooke, you mentioned this, grasscrete, soot, and sand, shall be 50% impervious cover. Paving stones, ungrounded soot and sand are deemed to be 75% impervious cover. And so, what you could get is, kind of parking areas, big parking areas of grasscrete or, ungrounded paving stones, and get, because over time, in my experience, over time, those things are going to basically kind of settle in and become kind of hardscape. Yeah. And I would and basically, cause a much bigger kind of basically paved area or developed area than, basically say, in time you're going the way I'm envisioning it, say, basically it's 50% impervious cover, but if you are basically doing rainwater harvesting or green roof, we're going to basically offset that and count it back against up to, from an engineering standpoint, 65.
So the other thing, the other point, which is kind of minor, but I would, right now, our code does allow you to go up to 75% if you put in certain features. And I really don't like those features, frankly. That's just me. But it also provides that those features are approved by our city council, but it doesn't refer to, they are approved by an engineer and certified by an engineer. I would like to change that around to where it goes strictly by engineering basis. If an engineer is willing to do that and our city engineer concurs as part of the building plan. I don't think that's, I have great faith in our city councils at times, but I want to make sure that they're not engineers for the most part. I think we have one or two in there, but that we have the ability to, we're required to have the engineers certify this to get to a point that they get the extra credits on that.
Yeah. Right.
So that's just technical part, but it does mean something.
Yes.
So, and it doesn't mean that the city council can't give them a variance anyway if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Yes. But we can, Brooke, I can get the information that's, and I couldn't agree more that this is an important part of what we're doing. I want to make sure that we incentivize people to redevelop. And my preference is lower height limits on that. And if I give them a bigger footprint to build on, that is the equivalent of a 2-story building, but they're building the same square footage on a 1-story building, but retaining the water and not causing a drainage problem, then I think that's probably something that appeals to me. And,
right.
And it's what I heard from our neighbors that we met with on Timberline and Westgate. And, you know, coming up with a plan, and I would add in there that while we're not going to put this part in there, we would encourage developers to contact their neighbors who have visually impacted by their development, and to work with them on a visual landscape barrier on that. And I understand from a legal standpoint, I kind of felt like I was opening a can of worms when I suggested that. But the concept is, if you want to make fences make happy neighbors, visual barriers make happy neighbors, and you want happy neighbors.
Right.
And I want to encourage that. And even if it's not a requirement, I would like to put that in there, that we would encourage our developers to contact the neighbors that are visually impacted and work with them on a visual barrier on that.
Right.
So
well,
we heard that.
No, I think I can work with this framework. I just, you know, at the end of the day, I think it will matter if we can tell the community, the council, that yes, we are increasing impervious limits, but here's the benefits that we gain by doing that. But I think we need to do a little bit more homework on where we are currently, so we can know that what we're doing isn't going to do any harm, and it will do good.
Let me ask, Carrie, are you on this call? Not seeing Carrie.
Yes, sir. I'm here. So
Carrie,
it took me a second to get unmuted.
Oh, sorry, Carrie. Do you have the capacity to figure the impervious cover on our properties in Rollingwood?
The commercial.
I can certainly try. I don't know. I'm working to pull those files for David right now, and he just sent me a list today. I don't know what I've got in the building file and what I don't, and what's accurate. I mean, because so many of these properties were developed so long ago, that the records that I've got are records that I inherited from PDG, and I don't know, I'm not sure what their retention requirement was for those documents from back then. I know they kind of tried to keep everything, but I just don't know that I've got as-builts. So
rather than, there's another way to do this, and that is to, we know what the square footage of each of the commercial lots are. We have that from the appraisal district.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do the calculations based on the GSI program that the city of Austin used, you can figure the building footprint and the parking footprint, which will give us a pretty good, Brooke, it's not going to be 100%, but it'll be pretty daggone close to coming up with that. The other option is to ask our engineer to calculate that, which they can do from satellites and the GSI program. But I think we might be able to do that. Because if I could figure out the distance between the building, the existing buildings and the residential lots, then I can figure out the impervious cover percentages fairly easy. And I can do that on all of them, or I can do it on all the major properties without, because, you know, like the Mustagatti's building is probably pretty close to 100%. I'm not sure how that came about, but
that property is I want to say, is it like 78%?
Yeah.
I know that because I've been working on them with a remodel of existing. I can.
Brooke, you're going to ask me how all this happened, and I don't know. It's been there a long time, so
let me see what I can get done.
Let's get that data. And Brooke, I appreciate where you're at. And I just want to let me ask Amber. You had written a memo that had some suggestion. Let me see if I can find it among all my papers here. Amber, are you still on here?
Yes. Was that the email from the city engineer where we asked what the recommendation was?
Yeah. And I'm not sure we need him to do that complete study, but I'm not opposed to it. But it doesn't seem to me that put it somewhere, and now it's gone. But that is, he was going to do a study from the headwaters of the creek, which went actually up on Camp Craft Road. And
yeah, he said from the Colorado River to Chatelaine Drive.
Yeah, that's way up on next to Westlake High School. And he would also have to do, there is a contributory of that goes up to Barton Creek Mall. My daughter lives off of Walsh Tarleton, and in her backyard is a perpetual stream that's about 3 feet wide and about 8 inches deep that flows constantly down hill there to Dry Creek. I don't know where it goes after that, but that's where it goes.
So the other point he made in his email was he said much of the development along Bee Caves is adjacent to the floodplain, and so that will restrict the area of land that could be developed. The average impervious cover of the larger Eanes Creek watershed based on a 2000 land use map references 26% impervious cover.
Yeah, but would, because there's a lot of that is in the floodplain.
And then he says the larger concern is probably development of the watershed upstream of the city and how that impacts those along the creek floodplain.
Yeah,
because most of those areas upstream, if you look at that watershed, most of those areas are residential. And so really the concern is a lot of those residential areas, you know, kind of as you get out in that watershed, you know, a lot of those residential areas, because you have a kind of a matrix of different jurisdictions with different rules. But you know, the concern is if impervious cover goes up on that, you're going to increase loading into the system.
I would like to point out, because I built in Westlake, they have an impervious cover for residential. Maximum impervious cover is 25% in residential. It's what I built my house to in 2008.
Yeah.
But they also have septic systems on most of their city.
Well, you had septic systems when your lots were laid out here in Rollingwood, and they were laid out at that nice, lovely size so you can build the big houses on it.
Okay. So let's do this as just a working thesis that we're looking at. 55% plus a 10% incentive that would include green roofs, revegetation, rainwater harvesting, or other potential deals that brought back the base to 55% as certified by an engineer, that the water quality in detention ponds would not count as impervious cover, that the and that the I would like that we would ask that our developers would work with the adjacent residential neighbors who are visually impacted to provide a visual barrier if possible, and we would also ask that our city engineer or that these properties, we would state that these properties would not add to drainage issues in the Dry Creek Basin on that. That's just, we'll reword that, of course, but that's kind of where I'm thinking we're headed. And Brooke, I'll work on getting that information for you before we cast a vote.
What our impervious cover percentages are?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
But this is just a working
okay.
Start with, and then I understand that we need to, I want to make sure that we're doing that. Now, I will say this, Brooke, I would a whole lot rather, and it's my competitive nature, I would like to see redevelopment of PK's Road in a way that our citizens want it to be redeveloped and not intrusive on their residential area. And to encourage that is, I would rather be at a competitive advantage to Westlake Hills and the city of Austin for somebody. If they're going to put a one-story retail center, I want it to be in Rollingwood. Let me put it that way. And I'd like for them to do that there, but I want them to do it in a proper manner. I don't want them to, it's no shortcuts on this. We fortunately or unfortunately are at the end of the pipeline on Dry Creek. So, we catch everything that's coming downhill on that. And, we don't want to add to it to any of our neighbors below us, even though there are not any buildings outside of Rollingwood between us and Town Lake. There is, of course, the city of Austin, and they've got their nature center there. But if we're not allowed, if our builders, redevelopers are not allowed to impact that floodplain by redevelopment, then I'm pretty much okay with that. What I don't want it to do is, and also I would like to mention in this deal that it doesn't have a negative impact on Edgegrove Drive drainage, because that's a road that many of us use to get in and out of Rollingwood. Now Wally, I'm just going to have to pick on you again. I'm sorry, you're just there. We've known each other too long not for me to do this. I'm sorry. Am I adding enough incentives to a developer to be able to redevelop a piece of property? I'm not specifically asking about yours. I'm just asking your opinion.
You got the right idea going, whether the percentages, because I haven't done a commercial development for probably, now close to 10 years, or maybe 15 now, time gets by. So I would say incentives always encourage a developer. I am a commercial developer, have been for about 40 years. Retail, strip retail, office warehouse, that sort of thing. Incentives are always a plus for the city or the population around a development to obtain what they really want and what's important. If you don't have incentive, just got a blanket, this is what it is and that's it, that by itself decreases the interest in development. But when there are incentives the builder feels he can work with, you're giving him a plus. So yes.
And I'm adding that extra little deal in there. It says, look, these are some suggestions that you can get this incentive from, but we're also open to innovative solutions that get us back to the same spot. With that said, I see a map. Elizabeth Day, you brought us a map. Elizabeth, are you on here? Nope. Not hearing.
I've seen the map there for the last 30, 45 minutes. So I was leaning forward to see what the map appeared to me. And I believe it's the properties that are in the cul-de-sac, the first cul-de-sac on the west side of the Palisades. And it looks like it's 3 lots that are basically either adjacent. Look from the scale, it looks like they're the one lot that's kind of cattywampus sideways is adjacent to the drainage field I have on the fronts on BK.
Yeah, that would be Elizabeth. Elizabeth, are you on here?
Yes, I finally found my unmute button, and those green areas.
I do apologize. I didn't see your map. My screen didn't show it, but
that's fine. It's in an email that Ashley forwarded to everybody, but I think I sent it about 10 till 4. And those green areas comprise what would be a 75-foot green space within the Palisades septic field area. So I keep forgetting you can't see my screen, but yes, that's Westgate. That's Westgate Circle, and at the upper left that would be Tina Butcher, and then immediately north of the septic field that's Diana Wallace, and then coming around the circle, I'm at 4 Westgate Circle, and then the catty-cornered one is Trey Chambers. And so those are the only 3 areas that I mapped.
So Elizabeth, I don't know if you've been on here long enough, but what we're talking about is trying to address the issues that that we heard from the neighbors there behind there. And y'all are representative of everybody that would be on Timberline, I think. Green roofs, revegetation, that sort of thing. Is that what I think that's what I heard that y'all were looking for.
Well, and pitched roofs would, I think, be very important depending on the topography. But I've been mostly here since about 4:15, and I think what you've mostly been discussing is impervious cover.
That's correct, but
so I think I'll have to go back and watch the video to catch some of the details.
For instance, what we're trying to do is offer some incentives to developers to redevelop, but also to add visual barriers, revegetation, and green roof programs to commercial buildings. So you're not particularly, it's not so visually impacted to our residential neighbors on that.
Right, right. Well, I heard a lot of good ideas this evening.
Well, if
I think 65% impervious cover is quite a lot.
Well, but remember and this is kind of deal. It's 65, but the net effect of it after they only get that if you add incentives that bring that down to the effective level of 55.
Well, I'm sure there's some solutions that work and some that don't, but
well, and that's why I want the engineers to have to certify it, that it works, because that's
right.
I don't want it to be necessarily a political decision. And
no, I think
I will tell you,
the science will have some answers on that. Whether or not green roofs work, but I think anything green that cuts down on erosion, runoff, the heat column, and a lot of undesirable environmental effects.
And again, I want to thank Sarah for bringing up green roofs. I'm embarrassed I didn't think of that, because I actually toured one a month or so ago, and it just slipped my mind totally. So, well, very good. I think we have a working premise, and I'll try to get a little more data on that so that we can kind of do that. Does anybody else like to make a comment before we move on from this item right now?
I have a question real quick.
Yes, sir.
And this is kind of for Brooke and Tom. I'm looking at the Rollingwood Code right now, and the reference on the impervious cover says Code 1987 and then amended Code 1995. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
For when the impervious cover was enacted?
Yeah. The
50% impervious cover?
95, that's probably when it was done.
Actually 87.
That would be, I can tell you who did it. The Travis Phillips was mayor when that was done. No, he was on planning and zoning when that revision was done. And I can't date back to the date, but I can tell you that's who who did it back in the day.
And Brooke, I want to say that that was one of my reasons for asking Carrie to kind of try to gather some of the as-built impervious cover data to the extent we had it, because I think, in getting there, it'd be nice from my perspective to say, hey, for these properties, here's generally where the as-built impervious cover is, and at 55, 65% impervious cover, we're actually going to be, for almost all properties, reducing the impervious cover plus getting better water quality attenuation.
Okay. That said, I'm gonna, if anybody else like to make a comment, now's a good time to do it on this item, or I'm gonna move on to setting our next meeting, which I would like to set for next Monday if everybody's available. And we'll continue this, and I'll try to have that data by then, and we can kind of wrap this up at that time, at least this portion of it. Yes.
Did Liz get to say what she had to say about the map?
Yes, she was showing specifically what the 75-foot barrier setback would do on that portion of the Palisades property that is the existing septic area. Because that was one question that we had as to whether if we went, whether that could be built on to make a difference on that.
Okay.
So,
I would like to make a comment, but you will see it in the email that I sent. The difference between 100-foot green space and a 75-foot green space makes the remaining area a lot more susceptible to some kind of construction. And if there's public access there, whether it's a structure or a parking area, I don't see that there's anything preventing people, once they have access, from using the existing green space for, I don't know, picnics or frisbees or a rock band or whatever they want to do. So I'm concerned about the development over there. So I just that's just my visual aid.
Well, and I appreciate it, and I think that'll be useful when we finalize everything on that.
I did find the City of Austin mapping tool, and yes. What you'll see in an email is just possible future development on that site. And I came as close as I could to the existing coverages and the area calculations for possible future coverage. And you know, it's just a what if. And
Okay.
anyway, there are a lot of factors. So that's all. But there's
That's what you're doing
you know,
now. Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And
okay.
I hope we're addressing at least some of these concerns, because that's what we're here for, is to listen and try to address as things come up.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, I think so.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, we will meet next week and continue with this and try to get this at least this part of it wrapped up. Any other body would like to make a comment from the public? And I'm not seeing any. So could I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Wally. And could we get a second? Second, and I will bring it up. Again, if you're opposed, if you're not ready to adjourn, just raise your hand, and I don't see any. From a landscaping standpoint, I'll have to tell Wally this, remind him of this. The first time Wally and I met was because my oldest daughter, who was just driving, went to something in his Palisades, and the sun was in her eyes, and to be a safe driver, she sped up to get out of the sun as fast as possible and ran over one of his landscaping trees and proceeded to drive home to my house, dragging this tree behind her truck with the end of it stuck through the oil pan. So remember that, Wally? I
remember it, and we both smiled without showing it.
I had to go over and apologize to Wally and offer a new tree, which he declined. That's been many, many years ago.
Yes, it has, but they've been good years.
Yeah. I won't say that she's, I hope she's a better driver. That's all I can say.
What happened
she learned her lesson from that.
What happened to her could have happened to anybody. When the sun hits you in the eye and you don't expect it.
Yeah. Thank y'all all so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.